Hello and welcome to the chipsgrooveradio podcast. I'm your host, Mike, and today we are covering Akira Yamaoka's masterpiece, Silent Hill 2. It probably wouldn't shock anyone who knows me that I chose this soundtrack as my first recording. It's such an important soundtrack and one that holds a special place in my heart. So there's no real reason to delay the inevitable. Today we're looking at Akira Yamaoka and his haunting soundtrack to Silent Hill 2. Now, most diehard gamers born around my time should be familiar with his work, having become a fan or simply hearing it in passing. Everyone seems to know about Silent Hill 2 and what it meant for the horror genre. Silent Hill 2 is a wonderfully horrifying game, and it's different than, say, traditional horror because while a lot of that tension is definitely visual, without the soundtrack to accompany it, would it have had the same power that it still carries, in my opinion? Invariably, I don't think so. Akira Yamaoka worked to create all the sounds as the sound designer and created the soundtrack for the game as well. So it all comes together very nicely under his vision. The soundtrack goes beyond being in a video game for me. Honestly, needless to say, I've listened to it intently countless times. To say this man composed the album in his own unique style is perhaps unfairly simplistic. To me, he has successfully chiseled out his own place amongst the more traditional composers of our time, and what came from his mind for Silent Hill as a franchise, and namely Silent Hill 2, is undoubtedly dark and horrifying, but transcendently beautiful in its execution and uncanny in its ability to make the listener feel every note. Where one track might leave you on edge, the next can wipe the slate clean completely and portray just a wonderful serenity. So I had never quite experienced anything like this when I first heard the album through the game. It was a very, very engrossing experience, and it was new to me. I hadn't heard a soundtrack accompany a game quite like this, so it was beautiful, it was intense, and it moved me pretty well to be talking about it all these years later. Now, one thing to note for the time, Silent Hill 2 was a very different type of horror game. The original Silent Hill back in '99 was an underdog competitor to the fan-favorite Capcom series, Resident Evil. At the time of Silent Hill's first release, Resident Evil already had 2 stellar games under its belt. And while that is a groundbreaking horror series, Silent Hill took it a different direction. I would say Resident Evil is a much more visceral, you know what you're afraid of type of experience. Zombies, you're waiting for rabid dogs to break through windows, dark corridors, that type of thing. So the fear of that game was a lot more visual to me, in my opinion. Silent Hill went more psychological, and while the first game is great, I think Silent Hill 2 really took it to new levels, not just for horror, but for themes and motifs throughout the game that were unheard of for video games and almost taboo, I would say. In no small part is the music a big, big component of that. What I think is important in Silent Hill is that it spoke to people on levels that are very difficult to achieve. With Silent Hill 2, you're dealing with very human, very social and psychological issues. It's not always what you're seeing that's frightening you. And in fact, in my case, I wasn't able to always articulate exactly what was scaring me at any moment. I believe, again, for me, it's mainly due to the music, the psychological horror, the subject matter, and perhaps lastly, the visuals. It wasn't always what I was looking at that was, a scary thing for me. It's what I was hearing. It's the overall atmosphere of the game, which is exactly what Akira Yamaoka was going for. So he nailed it, at least for me. I can safely say that Silent Hill 2 is probably the most disturbing thing I've ever experienced in any form of media, including movies, TV shows, anything. Video games, of course. So it has a very high bar set, for me at least, that I judge everything else against. When the game first came out, I had only dabbled in survival horror genre at the time. It was still a brand new experience for me. I hadn't played the first Silent Hill. Gasp. Nor did I know much about it. Resident Evil was something I was very familiar with, as my friends were huge fans. I played through Resident Evil 2 and watched my buddies play through the first one, though I myself never owned them. Double gasp. Admittedly, my views may have been more on the outsider's edge of that, because I wasn't a super Resident Evil fan. But any suspense I felt while playing or watching those games was akin to maybe, swimming in a shallow pool versus what I felt when playing Silent Hill 2. There was always a sense of caution with Resident Evil, but I was never afraid of drowning. One thing was for certain: when I popped Silent Hill 2 in, I had a deep connection to it. Okay, this isn't a review of the game, so please forgive the tangents while I remember just how wonderfully this game impacted me. The first song I wanted to talk about is White Noise. Initially, upon starting the game, the music stood out to me. It was the first time I was playing it, but I noticed that immediately I was filled with an uneasiness. White Noise was definitely a mood setter. There's a slow, low synth droning on with deep and ominous bells ringing out in a slow, repetitive 1-2 fashion. It just caught me off guard. James, the game's protagonist, stares into a dingy mirror at a rundown, kind of disgusting rest stop on the outskirts of town. And Yamaoka's atmospheric melodies already are haunting the game. Were it not for his music specifically, I believe the experience would have been much more muted. Plenty of composers are able to capture horror very well. And I just think that Akira has a strong ability to capture things in a way that's just different. And it really added to this experience. What struck me in the moment was that there was no real tangible source of fear, but the whole atmosphere made me so hesitant to keep going already. Yamaoka delivers a genuine sense of what are we about to experience. And this is just a small example of his vision to create that complete and encompassing experience. The next song I want to discuss is Theme of Laura. It is an example of one of his more traditional rock songs that are on this album. It has guitar, bass, drums, synth. The song itself, it is nice and smooth, but conveys a darker motif. When you hear it, it's before you've actually started playing the game. So it accompanies an FMV, or full motion video, which is comprised of story elements of the game. And there's a real sadness to the synth, and it delivers a sense of foreboding. It's merely hinting at the journey the player is about to embark on. biggest feeling one might get from the soundtrack is that sadness that's heard in the song. I think it permeates the whole experience. One of my favorite elements of that song is definitely that wavering synth and guitar in the middle. It's a theme, a common trait, I would say, of Silent Hill is that really drony synth sound, and it comes alive in this song, and I really like it. Now, you might not think that maybe a rock song would fit into an album that's otherwise dedicated to atmospheric tendencies, but I really think they work. There are a few songs on this album that are more traditional, and they do add quite a bit to the album. I call them punctuations because they kind of happen at moments that I feel kind of encapsulate what you've just heard. So they are interwoven throughout the album, and they kind of have this punctuating feeling to them. The synth songs like White Noise, which we heard before, and songs like Prisonic Fairy Tale are haunting and simple. They use simple atmospheric synth tones to relay their messages of a deeply strange world. Impressively, these rock songs are perfectly in keeping with that haunting aesthetic. Angel's Thanatos is probably the biggest aversion, I think, for this album. It has a little bit of attitude to it, but somehow, again, with Yamaoka's ear, it allows it to nestle itself comfortably in the middle of the album. So while the rest of the album feels brooding and it's full of pianos and disturbing ambient noises, I think Angel's Thanatos still somehow manages to fit in quite nicely. On paper, an album that hits different ends of the spectrum may sound completely erratic and like it wouldn't work, but that's just simply not the case. Now, I've often said that this album has an unusual quality to it. Oddly enough, I stand by the fact that you can rest to it, sleep to it. I have several times, in fact, and to get ready for this podcast, I even laid down and just listened to it. There's easily an unsettling feeling to this album, but taking it all in and really letting it wash over you is a pretty wild experience. There are two songs that help with that, I think, towards the middle of the album. I call them sister tracks because they fade into one another. Heaven's Night and Alone in the Town. Now, there are other songs that flow into each other. Like I said, this album is it's very one piece, very much one piece. So there are a lot of songs that flow into one another, but these are prime examples of how the themes of the game and the album never lose focus. Heaven's Night has a steady beat with a serene synthesizer driving the song, while light keys of piano accent the melody. It's just, in my opinion, such a beautiful song that brings a sense of ethereal beauty to the album. The lead on the song is a synthesized angelic choir, and there's a steady, constant drum beat that highlights the dreamlike quality of the song by leaving a tight echo at the end of a measure. It keeps it very hypnotic and not quite real. It is very dreamlike, which is appropriate in the context of the game. As Heaven's Night fades, the tracks shift and Alone in the Town comes in. It introduces with a lo-fi beat and a lower synth tone that's just kind of repeating. Once the song takes off, a punchy, slow bass line keeps it moving, and I think it's really cool because it's a little bit different than what we've heard so far. And with short interludes that kind of squelch both the bass and drums, the song delivers a relaxing, groovy tune with a twangy, underproduced guitar. hear an almost jazzy feel in that song. At least I get hints of it, I love how the lo-fi drums suddenly fill in and keep it moving. It sounds like a lounge band kind of just grooving in a smoky bar, or, bowling alley in this case. It's the wavering synth in the middle that really bring it home for me. It helps keep that cohesive theme throughout the Silent Hill 2 album. I just love it. Now, like I just stated, I liked to rest to this album. The songs are like a soundtrack to a dreaming mind, perhaps an intentional element being based on a game where reality is often simply one's perception of it. And talking about it, these things might seem strange for a psychological horror game and soundtrack to employ. And maybe with another composer, this game would simply be scary, striking fear, into the player or listener at all the right moments with orchestral stings and things like that. But with Akira Yamaoka, it turns what is otherwise a very horrifying experience into an engrossing one. And it kind of transcends those jump scare tactics, and it plunges us, I say us, I mean me, into kind of a cerebral nightmare. And you actually feel a mixture of conflicting emotions throughout the whole thing. So the brilliance of the soundtrack is that it allows the listener to think about the story, the themes, characters, and maybe even themselves in the process. It can be a dreary listen, and depending on what the listener gets out of it, it can be a wonderfully draining experience. As such, I have popped it in while taking a nap several times in my life. The sounds and ambience paint an incredibly unique picture in the mind of anyone listening to it. Now, Betrayal is next. I wanted to cover this song because it is a great example of the industrial nature of his songwriting on this album and the Silent Hill franchise as a whole, and it really helps bring that theme of the game through. It begins with a real strong, hypnotically rhythmic clanging of metal. The main theme of the song, otherwise, is an utterly haunting and despair-ridden choir. Quite the opposite of Heaven's Night. It's a fairly simple song, but I think it sets the stage for one of the final moments in the game. The main character is confronting himself after realizing his guilt has been haunting him throughout the game. It is a very powerful moment, and the music drives home that moment masterfully in a piece that it mirrors the dread of his realization and the darkness of his truth. Now, for me, the highlight of this album is easily Theme of Laura Reprise. As I previously stated towards the beginning of the review, the one constant emotion this album exudes is sadness, and this song is the perfect demonstration of that. Akira Yamaoka is writing songs to what the characters may be thinking or experiencing at any given moment. He's capturing not only the moment of gameplay, but perhaps the innermost thoughts and feelings of the characters. And I think in no other song is it quite as clear that the music represents that sentiment. To set the stage, Angela Orozco, a secondary character, is standing on a staircase that is burning. She is examining what appears to be a framed picture on the wall, but is easily identified as a horrifying memory of something from her past. Now, I identified with this scene very strongly in my own way, not identical to hers. I have my own experiences, but I took to this scene so much so, and I felt for her so much that her famous last words, "For me, it's always like this," are tattooed on my body. The song is so sad and so defeating that it can be a very emotional listen. It does start with a simple melody through the keys of piano, but it immediately portrays a sense of defeat. For me, for my money, the strings sell this song. They wail as if announcing the pain that Angela is feeling, and she either can't express or was not able to express. And it is such a beautiful piece that masterfully captures the themes of the game in one go. Listening to it again, I think the bells add a level of innocence to this character and the song that I think is really appropriate. And it just adds another layer to the song that really cements how powerful it is. So I love it through and through. Excellent song. Now, Promise closes the album with steady guitars, and I feel like it's a pretty perfect way to close the album, even for an album that could have ended a multitude of different ways. It is back to the more traditional rock, but it's not heavy, it's very somber. It captures the moment, and the listener finds themselves reeling after the final strum of the ever so slightly out-of-tune guitar sounds and fades. It very much encapsulates the whole album. Everything leading up to it makes this song just work. There's a real delicate nature to this last song that kind of rounds off the whole experience to me. It does keep those original themes of sadness, dread, defeat that permeate the whole album. So everything on this album is very deliberate. I don't believe Yamaoka would put anything in here that didn't work. Even the end of the album, which ends with an out-of-tune guitar ringing out, is perfect. It might not sound perfect on a more traditional album, but given the nature of this source material, it's highlighting the important aspects of these characters and the fact that they're not perfect, and maybe saying that no one is perfect. So I think it's really cool that it ends this way. I think it works. All in all things said, the album has a real ability to stick with the listener even after it's completed. It beckons them to listen again. I know I do. I listen to all of it, not because I have to, but because to listen to only a select track or two is to miss out on something incredibly deep and moving. This is an album where the listener looks forward to sitting down with it and experiencing it in its entirety, because anything less almost feels disrespectful. It is a 10 out of 10 experience for me. Do yourselves a favor, buy it. It has been released on vinyl. It has been released on CD. I'm sure you can get it online cheaply. It is so worth the money, I can't quite describe it. So, again, Silent Hill 2, it is a masterpiece. Akira Yamaoka is a god. So, thank you for listening, and I will see you guys next time.